Hey everybody, welcome to the Athletic Potential Podcast. My name is Mike Matthews. I am your host, and today is episode 12. Today we're going to go over a case of a player with a UCL repair. Then we're going to talk about post-competition recovery strategies, which will then be followed up with weight training in youth athletes. As an introduction, my name is Mike Matthews. I'm a physical therapist and strength coach, and I run and own Athletic Potential. And on this podcast, a general overview. Every episode, we usually start with a case. It's usually the last patient I treated prior to the recording of this podcast. And then we go over questions and answers from our listeners, or questions from our listeners. And then we finish with a general takeaway. Yeah, so let's jump right into this episode. The last patient I saw was a 19-year-old male baseball pitcher who had a UCL tear that required surgery. He had a UCL repair with an internal brace. Main difference between the repair and the better known Tommy John surgery is one is a reconstruction. The Tommy John surgery is a reconstruction where they take a tendon from another part of the body and turn it into a ligament, and the UCL repair is a repair using the same ligament in the athlete, except one of the things that they will do is use what they call an internal brace. It's an artificial structure that they put over the top of the UCL to provide some stability during healing, as well as some support, and allows for a lot faster recovery. And so with our Tommy John, the reconstruction clients, that usually takes anywhere from 12 to 15 months to come back fully to competition. And with the repair, the research is now saying anywhere from 6 to 8 months. And so it cuts the recovery in half, which is fantastic, because then we can save some seasons. Maybe if players get injured during certain times of the year and they are good candidates for repair, then we can definitely get them back for their next season, which is a major advantage to them. So anyway, so he's a 19-year-old pitcher who had a UCL repair. He's 4 weeks out, which means that he's now just starting his physical therapy regimen. They usually start with some sort of bracing or sling for the first couple weeks after the surgery, and then they have them. Doctors usually put the clients in some sort of elbow brace within certain ranges of motion, and then slowly increase that range of motion over time. And then usually around the 4-week mark, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, depending on how the surgery went, they will then send them to physical therapy or have them start their range of motion protocols. And that's was our last appointment with this player. So he just got out of the brace. His range of motion was pretty restricted. He wasn't able to extend his elbow all the way straight. He was lacking about 15 degrees when we got him out of the brace, so he's kind of all bent. And so we worked on that pretty extensively. We actually got him all the way down to complete elbow extension. And one of the things that I've noticed with the UCL repair clients and the Tommy John clients is as soon as we can get full extension of the elbow, we really want to try and get it. Now, if you've listened to the podcast in the past, I don't believe in pushing through pain. I don't think that necessarily helps us in the long run or even in the short run. And so I didn't really push through pain with him. We basically took 45 minutes of different manual techniques, hands-on techniques, to decrease the pain in the elbow, then to decrease the tension in the bicep, because the bicep was limiting his ability to straighten his elbow. And we just took our time, and we just kept working it. And we got it all the way straight. And I don't think his pain levels went above a 3 on a 10 scale the entire time, which is great. Now his job, one of the things we talked about was that his job was to maintain that elbow extension until I saw him again. And the hopes is that that's the case. It's not terribly difficult, other than you just have to make sure you maintain it, and by moving it. And exercises are quite simple. It's quite literally just extend your elbow, bend your elbow, and then we also work a lot. Somewhere else I've seen in clients that I've seen in the past that maybe we get down the road in the throwing program is that pronation, supination, the ability to turn the palm over and back, is very limited in our UCL repair and Tommy John clients. And that's something that we go after pretty extensively right off the bat. He did not obtain full pronation supination upon his last visit, and that's okay, mainly because the pain levels are high, and we were more worried about extension. And so we were able to get full extension. His pronation supination is about 90% of total motion that he should have. So we were able to get most of it, but not all of it. Everything else looked really good. His shoulder looked good. Wrist and fingers and everything else looked good. So a couple of the things I had him do upon his last visit was that not only did we work range of motion and really, try to get good extension and good flexion. His bending, actually, his elbow was pretty good too. We didn't have to work too much on that for it to get all the way back. But the other thing we wanted to start doing is start using the muscles in the area of the surgery in a way that will not cause pain and or potential problems with the incision, which he still has a bit of an open incision. It's healing well, but it's taking a little bit longer. But I really wanted him to start using those muscles again as they're good, and as long as we can use them in a pain-free way, in a very submaximal way, without putting stress through the elbow, and specifically on that repaired ligament, then we start that right away and we do that in the form of isometrics, and in a position where the arms at their sides, so arms up against their body, kind of almost like in a sling posture, up against their body, and then they push down without moving the wrist or the elbow, but we make sure they're in the right positions, that they don't create significant amount of stress through the elbow. But it allows the muscles to get going, because typically once their range of motion comes back, it's all about getting their muscles strength in their forearm and shoulder, and, to be honest, the rest of their body back. And then we're starting to cruise through this program and getting them ready to start throwing again. The repair clients start throwing quite a bit sooner than the reconstruction clients, which is the main reason for the discrepancy in how long it takes to recover. The reconstructions where they take a tendon and make it into a ligament, we have to allow that tendon to go through a process called ligamentization, where the properties of the tendon actually change to be more like a ligament, because they're not the same. If you look under microscopes, they're just not the same, and it takes time for that process to happen. And that's one of the reasons why I think the reconstructions take a little bit longer, or take a lot longer. In the repair, we don't have to do that. Plus, we have that internal brace that's also that's in there to act as a support and allow our clients to get back a little bit faster. So he actually had a really good first visit. I'm really excited to see how he's going to do. The surgery went well. All things look good. His next phase of this is he comes back in next time. My hope is he's maintained that elbow extension, and what we'll start doing is start looking at his shoulder while also working on elbow range of motion and strengthen the forearms, but doing so in a way that does not stress the elbow. But we'll really start going after the shoulder. The other thing that I really talk with our athletes about specifically that are going through this, if you think about it, this is probably the first time he's had extended time off from throwing in baseball in a while, and so we look at it as an opportunity for him to be able to take time to look at all the rest of his body and how his body works, and to really address any inefficiencies or areas that are suboptimal that will only make his game better once he's back throwing again. So it's a unique opportunity for these athletes to actually slow down. We get a good assessment on them. We take a good look at it. The movement assessment will probably happen, not next visit, but the visit after. But we really want to make sure that we're looking at every aspect of the athlete, not just the elbow after these surgeries, mainly just because this is a great opportunity for them to really improve the rest of their body, the rest of the way they move, their balance, their coordination, strength, power, you name it. This is a great time for them to do that. When they're really limited in what they actually can do on a field and that they can't throw. And so, anyways, that's something that we're going to start working on here pretty quickly. So I'm excited to see how he does. I think he's got a pretty good promising future. These surgeries do really well. We'll see how he turns out. But that's the last client I treated prior to this podcast. So let's jump into questions. And today... as a reminder, if you do have questions for the podcast, the best way to get that question to us is to go to the website, www.athletic-potential.com/podcast. And then there's a button on there that says ask a question or submit a question. Click on that. It'll ask you to enter your question. You do not need to put an email in or anything like that. However, I do recommend you do put an email in, because there have been plenty of times where I've answered these questions a little bit more specifically Not everybody gets a specific answer, but there are definitely questions that I get that usually require a little bit more of a specific answer that we then try and answer more specifically. And the only way to do that is if we have a contact way. It's typically best through email. So if you feel comfortable and you want to, go ahead and put your email in. If you don't want to, that's fine. Just submit a question, and we'll answer it on the air. We answer any and all questions that we get. So again, www.athletic-potential.com/podcast. All right, first question is from Jill. She says, my daughter is currently participating in competitive soccer. She more recently has been having issues with being able to recover between games and is starting to show on the field. I wonder what that means, Jill. I don't know. Is she sluggish? Is she sore? Is she in pain? I'm curious. But let's go back to the question. So, what are your recommendations for post-competition recovery in a tournament weekend? Good question. It's definitely a question we get all the time here at Athletic Potential. And as always, everything is independent upon the athlete themselves, the position, the sport. So we'll stay with soccer for this one. I think we can pretty much sum up the recovery strategies fairly well, so long as she's not a goalkeeper. If she's a goalkeeper, this recovery strategies change a little bit. But let's go ahead and just assume she's some sort of a field player, midfield, or a defender, or anything like that. So let's look at it from that standpoint. So a lot of running, a lot of sprinting, and so here's how I recommend what our recommendations are for our soccer girls, and it really depends on when their next game is. But let's just say they finish playing a game in late afternoon to early evening, and their next game is either midday or early afternoon the next day. The more time you have between games, then obviously the more of these recovery protocols that they'll be able to complete. But it's essentially the same recovery protocol. It's just how many times can you get it in before the next game. So let's just assume late afternoon, evening game to a noon to midday start for the next game in a tournament weekend. Sometimes you don't even have that. You have like the evening, and that's it, and they play in the morning, right? So let's go ahead and assume that. This all depends on what you have at your disposal. Let's assume you're traveling, you're playing somewhere, you're staying in hotels, and you don't have access to some big like an Athletic Potential where we have clients come in and do recovery work during their tournaments if they're here. But let's just say you're just kind of out on your own. You're in a hotel. My first thing is I don't have any of our clients ice. I don't believe that helps at all. I want to promote as much blood flow as possible with the least amount of effort from the athlete. And so the way you want to think about that is I want blood to be pumping throughout their legs as much as possible, but I don't want them to have to exert to do it because we're trying to get them to recover. So movement is good, light walking is good, really nothing strenuous. And then, I even advocate hot tubs. If you're in a hotel that has a hot tub, I usually tell them, like, look, go on a walk. You finish your match, you're going to go back, get changed, shower, do whatever you got to do, and then you're going to go on a light walk, and then maybe later that evening, if you have time, you're going to go hop in the hot tub and just literally walk around or stand or kick your legs, just really lightly. Just let the heat get there, but let some blood flow and continuous blood flow happen that way. I highly recommend for our athletes that are more in the competitive realms, where they're going to be playing lots of games in short amount of time, is that they purchase some sort of electrical stimulation unit that will really help them with their protocols. And so let me give you a little more specific, Jill. I tend to rant and rave on these kind of things. So let me go specific. So your match ends at 6 or 7 p.m. Food, I didn't even mention food. Like, hold on. As soon as the game's over, you can do like the cool down stuff if you need it. But realistically, if they feel like they want to go back and clean up and just get kind of shower, whatever, within 30 minutes, I really advocate for a really good meal and good hydration. So they really need to eat well. And eat well means good protein, a fair amount, if not a lot of carbohydrate, and then a lot of intake of water, preferably not like soda and juices and stuff like that, but more like a water, and really have a good meal and drink quite a bit of fluids. And say that happens after the shower, so game, shower, clean up, food within the next half hour to an hour. That takes anywhere from half hour to an hour to get. So then you come back to the hotel. At that point, one of two things should happen, or both. I would send the athlete down to the hot tub, tell them to get in, kick their legs around, move them around, really light, 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, no longer. You don't need more than that. We do need to regulate some body temperature to try and get some recovery going that way. But in regards to the muscles and in the legs and the joints, a hot tub for let's say 10 to 15 minutes. Get out, rinse off. You're back up in the hotel room. At this point, it is time to relax. We're probably looking at it's like 9 or 10. We need to get to sleep. At this point, if you have an electrical muscle stimulation device, then you're putting it on the legs, specifically the areas that are most sore. We have different protocols for different soreness areas. If there's no soreness, then typically it's a quad hamstring protocol where pads go in the quads, pads go in the hamstrings, or maybe even like a calf hamstring, calf quad protocol, preferably on both legs. And you put that electrical muscle stimulation device on, and you let it run for a while. And when we say a while, most of our athletes fall asleep on it for like a couple hours. And that way the muscles are contracting, but they're non-fatiguing. It's not fatiguing, and they're not having to do it actively in their brain. Like, they're not having to turn it on and turn it off. Like, think, flex, relax, flex, relax. They're not having to do that. The electrical stimulation device does that for them. And I let them do that for about an hour to 2 hours, sometimes longer, depending on how sore they are. And typically that puts them up to the point where they're either falling asleep or if they've fallen asleep. And then the key at that point is just really good sleep. So we don't talk a ton about these low-hanging fruits of making sure you have a good meal, making sure you have good hydration, but there's also sleep habits, right? So if they're in a match at around 6, 7 p.m., I typically advise our athletes at this point, after a good meal, after the hot tub routine, and while they're on electrical stimulation, they need to be off their screens, and no screens, no TV, nothing like that. Some way to calm their brain down. And they need to do that within about an hour of them when they hope to actually go to sleep. So they may actually get a meal, shower, meal, hot tub, and start the electrical stim. And at that point, they're an hour out of going to sleep right there. So their phones and everything I advocate would be not there. And they'd be either reading a book or relaxing or doing other things. But the idea, and you can just hanging out, talking to each other as athletes could do. I think that would be fine. But I really like the idea of sleep habits and really trying to get good sleep, because when you're traveling, sometimes that's really hard. But we know that if we have good sleep patterns, then you typically recover a little bit better. And when I say a little bit better, I probably should say a lot better. So good sleep habits, make sure they get enough sleep. Completely dark rooms, fairly cool. And then, wake up in the morning, light walk in the morning, get another meal in, depending on when your game is. But say assume it's noon or 1. Wake up, not too, don't want to sleep them in terribly late. Wake up at a normal time period, I don't know, anywhere from 7 to 8 o'clock, get up, go on a light walk, 10 minutes, 20-minute walk, just kind of get the blood flowing a little bit, get to a meal, have meat, and then come back, and then all that pregame starts up again. Now, by then you're talking about getting to the field for your warm-up and everything like that. But so you got two kind of recovery protocols that happen. So you have the right after the match in the evening, and then you have another a shorter one in the morning. We do have girls that will wake up and put electrical stimulation on immediately when they wake up for another half hour to an hour, depending on when they wake up. If they don't have a lot of time, I usually don't advocate for that. I advocate for go out and just go on a light walk, 10 to 20 minutes, and then eat a good meal, and then start getting prepped for the next match. So I hope this provides a little bit of a framework what to look at. If your match isn't, or the next game isn't until the evening of, like, say 6 p.m., well, the only thing I would really change is they still get up, they still do the walk, but then they do another session of that electrical muscle stimulation. I don't advocate for a hot tub before matches. I just don't know if it really helps. Plus, we have to deal with heat issues that may become a problem later. So then there's hydration issues there too. So I usually have electrical stimulation another 2 hours up to about lunchtime, another light meal or another good meal, depending on how the athlete likes to eat before competition. another light walk, moderate, nothing really crazy exercise, maybe another stim session a little bit closer to when we start talking about going back to the field, and then it's pregame time and go do your normal routine there. So, Jill, I hope that gives you a little bit of a framework of how we counsel our athletes. But I think if you have the general principle in mind of when it comes to recovery and it's not pain, so they're not dealing with an injury, not trying to milk their way through a tournament with a mild pain somewhere, what we really want to advocate is blood flow. We really want good blood flow to all of the muscles and the entire body, really. And we need good hydration, good food, and good sleep. And if you have those concepts in mind, then typically that'll cover most of your bases. And then there's subtle nuances that can also be helpful if we run into other things. And there's other protocols if you have pain or like some soreness in the joints. That's a little bit more problematic, but there's some other things there. But generally, that's what we have our athletes do, our soccer athletes do, and it seems to work pretty well. Every athlete will be more individualized depending on their need. And again, it's not for a goalkeeper. Goalkeepers have a little different program. In that we don't have to flush their muscles. We still want good blood flow through everything, but now we're talking about mobility and power development and those things. I'm trying to keep those heightened, and those recovery protocols don't differ a ton, but there are some subtle nuances there. So, Jill, I hope that helps. And let's head to our next question. Our next question is from Katie. She says, I have read a lot and heard a lot of information about not having kids start weight training as it is not healthy for them. I'm curious what not healthy means. We've heard stunted growth. We've heard, makes their bones weak. I've heard that from a client. It affects their cartilage. It's something else that we've heard. So anyways, I'm just curious what your not healthy is. And then when do you start weight training with your youth clients? I've kind of answered this on previous episodes, but I think it's a good thing to continue to go over just to kind of get an idea of how this works. So my biggest goal for youth in regards to weight training isn't so much to get them weight training so that they can get stronger, even though that's a fantastic thing. I really want youth to understand the benefits of good movement, good exercise, and being able to follow a good plan in the weight room. And really it's all about teaching them to move a lot better. And I typically will start the youth athlete with weight training when they show an interest. I know that seems completely arbitrary, and I apologize for that, but I don't actively go out to 10U baseball, softball teams and say, hey, we need to start strength training. I will talk to coaches and I don't go out and say, hey, these kids need to start strength training. What I usually go out and say is, hey, your kids look like they could use, like, hey, how can we help your team is usually the first question. And then the second thing I say is, hey, does your team have any interest in starting a weight training program or some sort of strength conditioning program? Have they talked about it? Have parents talked about it? Has anybody ever brought it up? Now is not necessarily a bad time to start, but I usually don't push it. I just ask them if there's interest. And if there's no interest from anybody on the team, I'm not typically pushing it very hard. I may educate and say there's definitely benefits to maybe starting earlier. And the main benefits aren't that they get stronger faster. It's the main benefits that is they learn how to move. They learn how to use weight equipment. They learn weight training programs. They learn how to gym etiquette. They learn a lot of things that we don't then have to teach them when they're teenagers, when we really want that strength to start showing up. We don't have to teach it then. It's already taught. So there's only a few studies that really indicate that there may be a problem with weight training in young athletes, specifically athletes with open growth plates and heavy growth periods. And to be honest, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen the issues. We're not putting, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of weight on our athletes. We're just not doing it in the youth realm. What we are doing is teaching them to move. And I can tell you how this normally works. So we have a group right now where we're training athletes that are aged from 8 all the way to 18. And most of them have experience, except for the younger guys, younger kids, and they all have to go through and show me the five. Well, I call it the five basic movements, which is not my five basic movements. I took it. My mentor Dan John. This comes from him. Fantastic reference, and is absolutely shown to be really effective. And they have to show me that they can squat. They have to show me that they can hinge. They have to show me they have to do a good push, which usually looks like a push-up. They have to show me a good pull, which usually looks like a row, and they have to show me they can actually carry something with and not make it look terrible. So they have to show me those five things, but realistically, they don't get a weight. They don't get an external piece of resistance, whether that's a band, dumbbell, anything like that, until they can show me the movement without anything. And once they can show me the movement, they can do the movement correctly, then I typically give them a weight. And we usually start light dumbbells, light kettlebells, resistance bands, really light. The idea is that they need to own the movement first, and then we can slowly progress in regards to getting them to move with resistance through that good movement pattern. So, Katie, I hope this answers your question. The fact that we don't really restrict the age of our athletes of when they start training. If we're going to start using, more weights and barbells and all those kind of things, I can tell you that on average, most of our athletes are not using dumbbells. I shouldn't say. Most of our athletes are using dumbbells, not barbells, and kettlebells. They're using kettlebells and dumbbells and not barbells. And we don't get to the barbells with most of our youth athletes until they're around 11 or 12. And I don't think that's because we don't want them to have barbells in their hands. It's quite simply because we can get a ton done just with barbell or just with dumbbells and just with kettlebells up to that point. And then we start looking at it from the standpoint of, it's not a bad idea to start training them with a barbell, especially if their sport is going to call for it later on. And then we can start getting those movement patterns with a barbell a little bit cleaner before we start, putting more weight on. And we really want them to be able to be proficient in movement as well as proficient in the weight room and knowing how to use different equipment by the time they're in their teenager phase, like 13, well, I shouldn't say that. It's a 14, 15, 16 is really where I want them to know how to use all of those things, because we seem to see a substantial improvements in strength. And if we can get them strength training through that time, we can see some really cool results. And so the youth phases are almost always about training movement first. Yes, we do weights. Yes, we use weights. Yes, we make them, push through. I shouldn't say push through, but we definitely make them move well. We make sure that they are lifting weights and they do it correctly. But I think my overall goal is more for the fact of teaching them to move well first, then put resistance on them, but then with the overall progression of that, they're going to be doing this for a long time, hopefully a lifetime, and we go slow and progress as needed at that point. So, and again, as everything, it's individualized to the specific athlete and their particular sport. We have certain athletes that are going to stay way more body weight for a lot longer than maybe athletes that we may start putting more weight, have them using weights, and those type of things. So, looking at your question, when do we start weight training with your youth clients? When they start showing an interest. We have a 7-year-old in the group. My 6-year-old, I guess she's 7 now, but she started weight training with us in our gym. My wife and I, when she was 5 or 6, picking up kettlebells, just mimicking our movements. I have an 11-year-old right now who started barbell training last year because she saw us doing it, my wife and I doing it, wanted to do it as well, so we started training it. So I just try to, if they're interested, we'll teach them, because I don't know if there's any negative effects of it as long as it's progressed correctly and as long as movements are good. So interest first, movement quality second, increased resistance over time third. Think this is a lifetime type process, not trying to get them as strong as possible in the shortest time possible. That's just not how it works for the youth training. At least that's not how it works with us here at Athletic Potential. So Katie, I hope that answers your question. I appreciate your question. So, all right, we only have 2 questions on this podcast, and I say only because we've averaged 3 questions for a good long while. I think the last 9 episodes we've had 3 questions. So this is the first time we've had 2. So if you do have questions, you definitely submit them. Again, Let's see, we talked about general recap, I should say. We talked about recovery strategies. Again, the main emphasis here is that you want good blood flow through all the muscles that have just been worked out or just been used during that competition, and you want that to happen a lot between one bout of competition and the next bout. There's a lot of different ways to do that: light walking, good meals, good hydration, good sleep, and then if you have electrical stimulation device, that will definitely be helpful as well. And then in regards to start training youth clients, we definitely want to start when their interest starts, as well as then progress good movement first, then add resistance, and then think this is a long-term lifetime process. So again, hey, we appreciate everybody that's listening to this podcast. Please tell everybody about it. Send them over. We'd love to help as many people as we can. The goal of this podcast is really just to get good information out there and help people make good decisions in regards to their athletic goals and help them achieve going from their point A to point B. And we can do that if more people know about it. So rate, review, refer. We really appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the podcast. And we'll get to you next time. Thanks.